our additional May CSA Minnesota chapter meeting. We appreciate everyone who's on and wanted to let you know that we are recording this so that it will be available for those who couldn't attend to listen to the meeting. All right, here's today's agenda. Just virtual meeting information and logistics. I want to thank Jason Peterson from Microsoft. He is running our Teams environment today, and we'll be making sure that the right people will be presenting at the right time, giving us those hosting rights. 110, obviously, I'm doing the overview today. So I am Mercy Schrader. I am the CSA Minnesota Sponsorship Director. At 1:20, CrowdStrike, one of our sponsors, will be presenting, and Scott Teschler from CrowdStrike will be speaking for about 10 to 15 minutes on an overview of who CrowdStrike is. 1:30, we'll present Kadulski, as well as one of our sponsors, and Eric Johansson will be presenting that material. And at 1:40, we have our keynote, David Notch from Medtronic, who will be speaking to the role of enterprise architecture in governing cloud security. And at 2:40, we will adjourn the meeting. This is who we are. CSA is the world's leading organization dedicated to defining and raising awareness of the best practices to help ensure a secure computing environment. The Minnesota CSA chapter is a registered 503(c) nonprofit with a mission centered on cloud governance and security education. We encourage free exchange of techniques and problem solving, and provide a forum to share cloud security knowledge and leverage expertise to influence advances in the field. Our website for more information is CSA-MN.com. Some reminders and some information. Again, thank you to Microsoft for making our virtual meeting possible in this weird normal that we are having. Our speaker today is David Notch, as I mentioned, and a big thank you to him for carving out some time in his crazy schedule to speak to our topic. And of course, to our sponsors who we couldn't be around if it wasn't for them. So Kadulski Security and CrowdStrike. And CrowdStrike is doing something special. They're offering a chance to win credit for their store, their company store. If you are interested in purchasing some items or receiving that credit to purchase, whether it's a water bottle or coffee mug or all the other various numerous things they have on their website, please send an email to info@csamin.org. This is a new email that we have started now that we're growing and becoming more mature. And it's a email that you can solicit any feedback on our chapter meetings or for the chapter in general, or any other additional information you need. So again, if you're interested in a credit for their store, please send your, please email that address with your physical home address, etc., and email address. And join us on Thursday, June 18th for a presentation on COVID-19 and how companies are conducting business continuity efforts during this pandemic. We changed our topic due to the circumstances we are in. We thought it would be more appropriate to address that versus changing landscape of application development, which we will address again in November. And new is our CSA Circle. So it's another website, and we have officially launched the CSA Minnesota Circle on Circle portal for repository for documents, past presentations, and an upcoming legal corner as well. So if you have any questions around this, again, please email info@csamin.org if you're interested in joining, and we can help you with that. And a big thank you again to Jason Peterson from Microsoft, David Notch as well, and our sponsors CrowdStrike and Kadulski. We know how busy everyone is, so we appreciate your time today. We'll wrap up probably around 2:40, close to 3 o'clock, and everyone can be on their way. So again, thank you everyone who has joined virtually, and I will go ahead and give this over to CrowdStrike.
Awesome, thank you very much, Mercy. This is Scott Teschler. Give me a moment to share my desktop.
Hey Scott, while you're getting your desktop ready, this is Pete Venuto with CrowdStrike. I just wanted to clarify a couple things to the group. First, I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy. It's interesting times. They definitely are. I'm sure everyone's working from home. So hopefully everyone's families and their coworkers are safe and healthy. I'd like to thank the CSA Minnesota for this opportunity because it's great to get a group of people that we can tell our story to. We'll try to be brief, and Scott's a lot briefer than I am, so that's a good thing. Just a clarification on the gift, Mercy. They don't have to send no one has to send their physical address. That was kind of the reason why we wanted you to send an email to Mercy. If you could just send your email to Mercy, what we will do at CrowdStrike is we'll get you out a code through Mercy that you can go onto our CrowdStrike store. You can pick out some swag, and whether it's, like as she said, whether it's a T-shirt, a water bottle, a coffee mug, a keychain, whatever it is, you can pick it out and we will ship it directly to you. You'll put your address into at checkout, into our secure checkout, and you will get the item for free. So if you would just email that you're interested in the CrowdStrike gift to Mercy, everyone who does will get something. I'm sure my marketing folks will kill us for that, but we're happy to sponsor the meeting. I think we probably would have made up for that with a happy hour afterward, but we'll take giving a gift away at this point. So I'm going to introduce Scott Tashler, who's Director of Product Marketing, as you can see on the screen, and he's going to give you just a brief overview of CrowdStrike. And once again, Mercy, thanks a lot for allowing us to sponsor. And Scott, you can take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Scott.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Scott Tashler. I'm with CrowdStrike. I'm based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, sort of born and raised here. I'm really happy to have the opportunity today to talk to you a little bit about CrowdStrike and kind of pivoting security to the cloud. Now, when we at CrowdStrike talk about what it is we do, you will hear very clearly from every person in this company that CrowdStrike stops breaches, and this is a mission that is drilled into us from day one. Note that this doesn't say how we stop breaches. This doesn't say where those breaches come from. This doesn't say what types of attacks we're looking to stop. It's a rallying cry that says, look, it doesn't, if we're 100% good at effective at stopping malware and you still get breached, we have still failed to do our job. And this sounds like a bold claim. And when we look at how to address it, we think the key metric to look at is speed. When we look at how attacks progress, there's a point in time where our job as a defender gets exponentially more difficult. And that's that, if we look at MITRE's attack framework, that's the point of lateral movement, right? This is where the attacker takes their first step beyond their initial point of intrusion, off into somewhere else, in the direction of their actual goal in their environment. And at that point, when my job as a defender gets a lot more challenging, right? Because now I have more points to investigate, I have more points to remediate, and it becomes a lot more difficult to ensure that I have really, truly contained something. And when we talk about the metrics of time in cybersecurity, oftentimes we think of things like dwell time, which is often measured in days, weeks, or months. But at CrowdStrike, we know that the breakout time is a much different time scale. It's measured in hours. And we know that because we have one of the world's largest cloud-native endpoint protection offerings that gives us deep visibility into the entire, all these different phases of an attack. And so we can create some really interesting metrics to measure that. We know breakout time is measured in hours, from initial access to that first point of lateral movement. And so if we as defenders are going to be effective at kind of interrupting an attack in progress, obviously we want to prevent, block as much as possible. But we also need to think about what happens after that. And so we've kind of coined this rule that we call the rule of 1-10-60, which means you need to be able to detect an emerging threat within the first minute. You should targeting to investigate and understand the scope of that threat within the first 10 minutes, and then have capabilities in place that allow you to respond to threats within the first 60 minutes. Now, obviously, these are pretty ambitious goals, I think, for a lot of us. but it gives us a yardstick and something to aim for in order to create security processes that are resilient in the face of the kind of threats that we see today. So this rule of 1-10-60 it brings all kinds of challenges, and I think when we think about the defending assets in the cloud, there are some real interesting dynamics going on here that make this a challenge. Obviously, we see that the cloud is highly dynamic, right? With shadow IT and new things, new assets, new workloads popping up on a minute-by-minute basis. Oftentimes, it's nearly impossible for security teams to understand what's even out there, let alone ensure that they're properly configured and properly secured. Gartner has said directly that nearly all successful attacks on cloud infrastructure are the direct result of misconfigurations, mismanagement, and overall user mistakes. And so keeping on top of just what it is I'm protecting and ensuring that it comes in with a, at a solid baseline is problem one. Of course, if I could do that in just one place, life would be amazing. But I think none of our organizations, very few organizations, have the luxury of saying, "Hey, we are 100% AWS or Azure or what have you." And so the idea that we have to do this not only in one cloud, but across multiple clouds, public and private, introduces a great deal of complexity. It's a challenge for a lot of us to deal with. And then finally, there's the question of whose job actually is this? When you spread when you look around, there is you have your actual security architects, your security operations team, your DevOps team, your cloud security provider themselves. And of course, each one of these individuals has a role in providing security that doesn't necessarily apply when we're talking about of securing traditional endpoints. All these add up to a whole ton of complexity, which makes it very difficult for a lot of organizations to grapple with the security complexities of the cloud in the same way that they might have done with their more traditional endpoints. I wanted to share with you a few insights from CrowdStrike's threat intelligence team. So you might know CrowdStrike has one of the world's largest threat intelligence gathering organizations, and they're responsible for some fantastic reports that come out, and you'll see some of the adversary artwork there in the middle that represents some various nation state and e-crime groups that we track on a regular basis. So our intel team has over the last 12 months or so has I sort of cherry picked a few different reports that have come out to highlight specific threats. So, for instance, the first one here, third-party cloud infrastructure compromised. This is a great example of a misconfiguration, intruder access to Kubernetes instance, likely through some sort of phishing attack or some other way to obtain valid credentials. By doing that, they were able to kind of crawl around, identify the relevant AWS credentials that this particular organization used. And of course, AWS represents a bottomless resource of resources, which is if you're in the business of crypto mining, it's exactly what you're looking for. So these guys were able to install crypto miners on some critical resources and siphon off some of those resources for their own gain. They showed remarkable capabilities when it comes to actually evasion. They were able to leverage Cloudflare to hide their IP addresses and keep them out from under suspicion. They were able to configure their they clearly understood resource consumption within AWS and configured their payload in order to stay below the radar and not consume too much and not run up the tab in a way that would raise suspicion. We have seen nation-state actors demonstrate interest. In the case of the report here referenced in the middle, the actual adversary was Fancy Bear, who's a Russian adversary. They have been seen to target cloud infrastructure directly. We've seen them in this particular report. If you drill into it, there's a lot of interesting information about how by accessing this cloud infrastructure, they were able to spin up, I think it was a Windows 2012 server that they use for staging, bring in tools, and do all sorts of discovery and work to deeply understand the organization, including crawling deeply through their public cloud billing records so that they could better understand the kind of overall footprint and organization of the organization they were targeting. Finally, just a couple interesting ones over here on the right. We see kind of new attacks leveraging kind of well-known techniques. In this case, we've got a great example of an adversary who's actively scanning for Docker APIs. By doing this, they can if they can identify open API endpoints, they can instantiate new systems. And again, in this case, this was another example of a mindware campaign that was very impactful for this particular customer. We're also seeing tools produced that allow pretty much anyone with a moderate amount of skill to operate as if they were a well-trained cloud expert. In this case, Paku, you see is referenced down there in the lower right. Paku is it's a type of piranha for one side, but it's also a tool set that's out there that you can think of as sort of Metasploit for the cloud. So it's often used by red team to execute and kind of do their own internal testing. But of course, these kind of tools are also widely used by folks with less pure intentions to execute their own threat. Now, at CrowdStrike, we think it's important to kind of pull all this together into a single platform to protect all your workloads, because of course these cloud workloads, while they introduce new twists, are again they're still at the end of the day running very familiar and similar operating systems, and the underlying exploits are not themselves necessarily novel. They're just being applied in a new and novel way. And so CrowdStrike got our start in endpoint protection with next-gen antivirus and EDR, and around that we've built a platform that allows us to take this cloud-native infrastructure and single lightweight agent, and then apply it to different types of security applications. So I mentioned endpoint security, we have security in IT operations and threat intelligence, but also cloud security. With it, but also apply the same techniques to securing the cloud. The approach we took to that, I think, is similar to the way a lot of organizations are looking at that, which is go through the same overall. You want to go through the same overall kind of workflow that you would for any type of workload, right? So first and most important is the ability to discover and understand your footprint, what's out there in real time, so that you can validate that it's properly that it should be there, that it's properly installed, configured, monitored, and maintained. We want to be able to apply runtime protection to those workloads so that we can block known types of threats and keep them as secure as we can. We also want to be able to monitor and record activity that's going on those things. This supports our ability to do detection and response on emerging threats. It allows us to do things like threat hunting and all the other types of disciplines that apply to endpoint security within the cloud as well. And these should apply not just to traditional virtual machines and kind of traditional what we think of as endpoints, but also things like containers. That adds some new wrinkles. So I think I'm pretty close to the end of my time here, so I'll just close by saying that CrowdStrike's got a lot of experience helping organizations do a lot of these things, And we're really excited to be helping, as organizations pivot to really understand how they're handling this new cloud-based world. So with that, I'll close it up and hand it back to you, Mercy.
Thank you, Scott. I have a question for you. During these COVID times, are you seeing with your customers a downturn in any attacks?
Well, that's a great question. No, quite the opposite, actually. So when you look at our threat intelligence team, actually has put out some really interesting reports. If you go to CrowdStrike.com, I think there should still be a banner right at the top where you can go to a hub to kind of learn more about the threat, what kind of changes we're seeing in the threat landscape. But in a nutshell, with everyone having left the building, it introduces a lot of chaos, which is exactly what the intruders of the world are looking for. So whether it's changing phishing techniques to take advantage of the fact that people know that their IT support people and all their workers are working from home and are maybe a little more willing to trust someone on the other end of the phone. We're seeing that kind of thing. We're seeing phishing lures that are based on with COVID-based content within them, and also we're seeing that a lot of the overall tools that organizations use in order to do things like vulnerability scanning, patch management, remediation. All these things are often based on the premise that the systems you're protecting are inside the four walls of your building, which of course is a bad assumption these days. And so CrowdStrike's been doing a lot because we've had a lot of interesting conversations lately because of the cloud native nature of what we do and the fact that it really doesn't matter where those endpoints are. Gives us a real nice ability to provide protection for those in this newly mobile workforce world.
Thank you for that. All right, Jason. Next up would be Kadulski to present, and Eric Johansson.
All right, great. I will go ahead and take over here. Oops. Is this shown for you guys, the deck?
Yes.
Yeah, you're in presentation now. Looks great.
Looks good. All right, great. So yeah, hi guys, I'm Eric Johansson. I'm Managed Security Practice Lead for the US for Kanellis Security. And my talk today is about unifying cloud and legacy security and really just, wanted to address visibility and protection across both environments with everyone, going through their digital transformation journey. First, real brief information about the Kanellis Group, of which Kanellis Security is a part of it. We are a Swiss company. We've actually been around since 1951. We actually have thousands of patents. We spend about 1.5 or 150 million rather per year in research and development. So that's what's got me interested in joining the company over 3 years ago. Is we're really engineers and DevOps folks at heart, and our main focus is in data protection, and then we also have physical security as part of our approach. And so we've done a lot of interesting things across the years, and probably you've used our products without knowing it, such as our content protection, which is utilized by just about all providers out there that are doing streaming, to, for example, cryptocurrency, where 7 out of the 10 top cryptocurrencies have been audited by Kanellis Security for validation. So let me just highlight the goals of this presentation. First, just want to give you guys a definition of what we're talking about from a cloud and legacy systems perspective. Then talk about the challenges around supporting both legacy and cloud systems and kind of the pros and cons. And finally, close with protection strategies for hybrid infrastructure. All of this with the idea that I have around 7 minutes, so buckle up. So what defines a cloud system? Really looking at at systems that have one or more of these properties, right? You can provision it rapidly. It has very elastic scaling capabilities, which is obviously a big attraction point for cloud. Shared management responsibility. You don't own it 100%. It's multi-tenant, and it supports robust automation capabilities, which kind of ties into some of those other elements above. And why are people moving to the cloud? Interestingly enough, I didn't really have to change this deck at all for COVID-19, but really what I've seen, obviously, I'm sure you guys agree, in the last 3 months, we've seen just a rapid adoption of cloud movement thanks to COVID-19. And the drivers haven't really changed, but I think they've just accelerated. So, deployment speed, of course, issues with, I want to go innovate and I don't want to have to deal with different corporate entities, which obviously creates its own challenges as far as, data goes. And then a desire for new capabilities that perhaps the IT infrastructure within an organization doesn't have, just gives you that much more capability. And here's some of the most common cloud systems. Obviously, back when I started in IT, the on-premises model was everything, right? I actually built a couple data centers back in my day. And then as you move down the path, you start getting into that infrastructure as a service, which we're all familiar with from the perspective of AWS and Azure. And then, of course, moving forward, you have, your platform of a service. Like we're all familiar with the likes of Office 365, right? I mean, I don't think many people today are thinking, be a great idea to build an Exchange server. I really got to get that going. Most people are getting out of that business. And then finally, what's really gaining a lot of speed and steam, of course, over the last several months is SaaS. There's so many different platforms that can give you an entire software as a service capability and outcome. And so that's, all of these are kind of those cloud systems that we're talking about here today. So looking at the pros and cons with legacy systems, obviously the strength is there's very mature technologies. We've been doing security for over 20 years, as a cybersecurity industry or community within those environments. So there's available talent. The perimeter is better defined. I mean, you know exactly what you have because you built it and you have kind of things built around it. And there's more opportunities for defense in depth. A lot of times that's where your users are. And so, you have all of those built in. Then you have the challenges, though. So, one of the things we deal with all the time when we're speaking to clients as a cybersecurity solutions provider is, it's actually pretty difficult and it's rare for us to speak to a client that says, I know every single thing sitting in my environment today. You have things like IoT and bring your own device and all of that, which can really make getting your arms around it difficult. There's that false sense of security. I mean, I think, we all know about defense in depth and hard shell and all of that. And CrowdStrike is a great example of it, right? Where the perimeter has dissolved greatly. And so you have to look at solutions like EDR to detect lateral movement and to protect your data where it is and where your users are. You have the physical requirements. So certainly, whether it's in a closet in your office building or actually in a data center, there is still that physical, you got to allow people or not allow people access into your rack. And then lack of automation is certainly a challenge. It's not necessarily a native thing with those legacy systems. So moving into cloud kind of flips the strengths and challenges around to a certain degree. Asset management is pretty easy. It's all there. AWS, Amazon always wants to, they're not going to miss a cent of their bill. They're going to know everything that you're doing, and they're going to, make sure you get charged for it. Physical security is not an issue. Automation is robust, which is obviously one of the attractive things with cloud. Really easy to deploy and provision at will. A great example, we have clients that have Black Friday type concerns, and certainly cloud is very attractive for that. You can spool up to 3 times your size for a few days or weeks, and then scale back. Robust automation, and your experts are really focused on certain tasks and not necessarily having to do all of some of the underpinning components. Which brings us into the challenges. you've got a lack of trained talent. Cloud has certainly been a thing for quite a while, but the surge in cloud adoption has been happening over the last several years. So getting people that are trained in these areas can be difficult. Some of the technologies are immature, and obviously every day things are getting better. And there's a lack of understanding of the shared responsibility model, which is certainly a concern. I mean, you're not just, I guess, going back to some of the breaches and things like that have happened, where people are like, well, shouldn't AWS or whoever have issues with the bucket being exposed, as an example? And that really boils down to it's your responsibility. You're just given a platform. And the move to the cloud it often is invisible to security teams, meaning it could be rogue or shadow IT or something like that. So that's certainly a challenge. So just kind of highlighting some strategies for success. So number one, create a framework, a policy, apply it to both environments, and really looking at, your data and those types of issues that may exist in the cloud. The biggest challenge, obviously, is if you have rogue developers going off and doing their own thing, they're probably not just playing with their own fake data. They're probably using some real data, and that certainly creates issues. Take a look at your policies, your incident response plans, and make sure that both legacy and cloud systems are in mind. It's similar to laws that we have on the books. They've had to be modified for, the .com world and things that have changed around cybercrime and those types of issues. As you can, utilize tools that work across both cloud and legacy systems. And this is actually, a very difficult task. As you guys probably are aware, if you've been involved in cloud migration, it's not as simple as just taking your Fortinet or Palo Alto and slapping it into the cloud. There's pros and cons with doing that. Strengthen your endpoint security. That's one thing you can definitely improve across all of your environments. Have a singular agent that applies to everything. Make sure it's EDR or better, so you can get that behavioral visibility no matter where it goes. Cloud configuration checkers are a great tool to utilize, and even if you don't have expertise, have those checkers so they can let you know when there's something wrong, and then you can quickly address it, because let's face it, there's always Google for people that don't have expertise. It's fairly easy to determine what's wrong and solve it. And make sure that you have the right budget to include security. So, Office 365 is a great example. We work with a lot of clients that have these Microsoft packages, and Microsoft is great at, creating that Trojan horse, right? We all need Windows, we all need Office, so they can give you a license that includes all this stuff and a little bit extra, and you'll deploy it, and maybe you don't give it a second thought, but you really need to evaluate, are we doing two-factor? Are we logging everything necessary? So Office 365, obviously some unique challenges because your email isn't hosted in your data center anymore. It's now increased your attack surface. It's accessible anywhere. So one of the things we've noticed from our incident response teams in 2019 was about 60 to 70% of all IR that we did had an element of Office 365 access involved. So it's a huge target. So make sure it's budgeted into that, and keep security in mind throughout your cloud adoption. Don't forget the basics like asset management and vulnerability management and patching. Asset management, you can't protect what you can't see. If you don't know about something, you can't protect it. So that's obviously important. And then certainly as you evolve into the cloud environment, there still are vulnerabilities, just like you're on premise. You're still running operating systems. You're still running applications that need to be patched, and you need to identify and prioritize those patches. Utilize automation across both environments as much as possible. Again, common tooling is advantageous in this case. If you can find something that can help in both areas, cloud-specific tooling can make things difficult if you don't have the expertise. So as a call to action for all of us that are security professionals, it's critical that, number one, learn about security in the cloud and continually educate yourself, because as we've seen, things are evolving daily. So stay abreast of the latest. Promote security education. and also security careers to others. So do the best that you can as someone that's practicing security today to engage people that are interested and help them as much as you can and give them advice. Work to be able to say yes to lines of business. My favorite thing is telling people yes and then having them sign a risk acceptance. Hey, great strategy, right? I can do it, but here's all the risks and accept that and we'll move forward. It's a great way to kind of balance both. But we don't want to be the no people. And know the business drivers, right? So why are they doing it? And try to protect that. There is a reason why the business is moving to the cloud. It could relate to co-location fees. It could be that elasticity, so they can deploy more quickly and have more resources, and then also turn down, understand that and help them secure it. And then, of course, for all of us, remain vigilant and aware of what's happening and always be on the lookout. And that's it. I think I did pretty good on time. That's my contact information. If you have any questions or want some assistance, we are local in the Twin Cities area. We have an office in Minnetonka, so we're always available to help. Any questions?
I have a question, Eric. I was wondering now with all the remote workers that who has access to what is becoming more and more important within organizations. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen a big surge in remote workers and understanding kind of as people rush to deploy everybody, get their VPN licenses up, get everybody laptops. There's a lot of things that can oftentimes be missed. And so as much as possible, go back and get your arms around it. And, we've seen a lot of interest and engagement around things like identity and access management as a potential line of discussion. All the Office 365 conversations are very interesting. As I mentioned earlier, that attack surface increases. Same thing applies, to those types of things when your workers are remote and maybe they weren't in the past. So you just have, it's a whole new kind of mindset working remote.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you again. Great content.
Thanks.
All right. Next on the agenda, Mr. Notch.
Today.
David, are you able to present?
Okay.
Yep, we hear you. Yes,
Okay.
we do.
My Bluetooth literally went dead 2 minutes ago, so I'm switching over.
Oh, no.
Okay.
We see your screen.
Okay.
And now you're in presentation mode.
Okay, video on?
It is.
Okay, great. Audio's okay now? I'm on my PC speaker now, Mike.
Yes, we hear you clearly.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. All right, well, hello everyone, and it's great to be here today with all of you, and thank you for attending, and also thank you to our sponsors and to the CSA board for putting this together. I know it's rather difficult in the current situation, but I think these collaboration opportunities are really great to keep these going, so really appreciate all of it. My hope today is that this spurs further discussion. I'll put my contact information at the beginning and the end here. I'd really like to connect. If you have interest in this, or something that piques your interest, I'd love to talk to you offline, after today, about some collaboration opportunities, maybe compare notes and so on. I mean, that would be, I think, a really successful outcome for me. So please don't hesitate if you are interested in talking further, please do. I'm going to share quite a bit today about how Medtronic runs, or how enterprise architecture of Medtronic works with our cloud security governance function, and how we manage that, and how that can both improve our time to market and also still maintain a level of governance and kind of right size the governance. So really from a learning objective standpoint, again, how we leverage enterprise architecture to really right-size cloud governance. Of course, cloud is about, you hear a lot about DevOps, you hear about flexibility, scalability, et cetera. Oftentimes, the legacy governance processes don't fit that model very well. So we really try to take a new look at that and still maintain and perform the governance responsibilities that we signed up for the organization, but still allow our businesses and our project teams to really move at the speed they want to move at. And we've had varying levels of success at that. But we can get into some of that. The second item here is really how we develop security patterns to really improve and standardize and simplify cloud security. So not a one size fits all by any means, but we don't want 20 different ways to do the same thing. So that's really what one of the things we're trying to accomplish. Then also to delegate security design responsibility to our dev teams, our ops teams, and our DevOps team. So we run the gamut. And Eric, I appreciate your comments around this is really not just a cloud thing, quote unquote. It's really all of these teams, both the more our traditional development teams and our full speed ahead DevOps teams. We have to really serve all those teams in some way, and really trying to leverage enterprise architecture to put the framework around that so we can do it more effectively. And also to support how we support a federated enterprise architecture model. We're quite cognizant not to create an ivory tower, at least not a very tall one. And we're really trying to put more of that responsibility into the hands of the experts that run these systems day to day. It's certainly my belief that you cannot separate architecture from operations and engineering. You really have to understand how those architectures really work and function in the real world. So we try hard to maintain that linkage. And then finally, how we're planning to align our global security and data localization requirements using the design once, deploy anywhere strategy. So rather than designing a system for, let's say, the United States, and then for EMEA, and then for Asia Pacific and China, can we come up with architectures that really support all those jurisdictions, especially now that so many governments are moving to a data localization strategy where we can't take the data out of country. And that's really presents issues. So on one hand, if that had been a requirement 10 years ago when all we had was on-premise data centers, that would have been a really difficult problem to solve. But with cloud now, we can deploy it to China, deploy it to the Netherlands, deploy it to US East, and use by and large the same design with some tweaks for local security requirements. But that's really the ultimate goal here is to not have to redo this every time. Okay, so to really, I think, fill out those learning objectives, first of all, I'm going to touch on the overall enterprise architecture context. So how do we run EA, so to speak, both from a strategy process standpoint, also from execution standpoint. So that'll give you an idea of how, when we fold in cloud, then how do we approach cloud? How do we approach it similarly, and how do we approach it differently? And I'll touch on our cloud security strategy, the frameworks that we're using for that strategy and architecture, and then also the architecture patterns and how we develop some of those. And then there's a version 1, which is kind of our current state, and we're actually just embarking on our version 2, I'll call it, our future state, and how those are going to evolve. So version 1 we did 2 to 3 years ago. And as I think all of you know, a lot has changed in the cloud space, not just cloud security space, but the cloud space in general. So we're really looking to leverage those new developments. Okay. By all means, feel free to ask questions in line here. We certainly don't have to wait till the end. Okay, so very high level, the way we approach enterprise architecture is we really start with the business value, and we have a group of business architects that work with the business and project teams to understand what are we really trying to accomplish from a business standpoint, not technology necessarily, but from a business standpoint. So really the what. Ultimately, that leads to an information-centric outcome. So much of healthcare now is really transitioning to the data is almost becoming more and more important. It's not just about the devices anymore. It's really about the outcome. So what devices, what information, what procedures and intelligence can we gather from that to help improve the outcomes? And then in the middle here is the how. How are we going to do it? It needs to be flexible. It needs to be standardized. It needs to be simple as possible, and secure and compliant, of course. And as you would imagine, in the healthcare field, there's no shortage of compliance requirements and regulations we need to comply with, both domestically and abroad. So that is a core concern. Okay. So that's really overall, kind of the overall high-level strategy process. And then from an internal organization standpoint, we really have three different ways that we organize and three different, I'll say, constituents that we serve. The first one being all the regions, whether it's the Americas or EMEA, Asia Pacific, India, China, et cetera. Each of those regions has their own requirements and goals that they have. Secondly is the IT leadership alignment. So we have, obviously I align to our security pillar, and to our CISO, and then also to our infrastructure operations teams. We have other senior architects that align to our business systems, SAP, et cetera, our data warehouses, our IoT strategies, and so on. And there's a number of us that align to each of those verticals, so to speak, from an IT leadership standpoint. And we really support those teams from an EA standpoint. Then finally, there are strategy tracks. So for instance, I'm responsible for primarily enterprise security architecture, cloud security architecture, and then also cloud in general and some infrastructure and operations architecture. Again, we have other people that serve different strategy tracks, and those owners may or may not be inside of enterprise architecture. We by no means try to cover every possible scenario, nor should we, frankly. So that's largely how we, so it is a fairly matrix organization from that standpoint. You can see across the top, then we have the business architecture, information architecture, technical architecture, and then of course security architecture. So all those really play a role in defining what the outcomes of those projects and strategies are.
Hey Dave, from a context perspective, what percentage of your enterprise is in the cloud versus on-prem?
All right, so touching on our operational model, pretty typical initiate, plan, analyze, build, that whole feedback loop and how we develop. Is someone trying to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think Carrie was trying to ask a question from Jeff Rasmussen. What percentage of your enterprise is in the cloud versus on-prem?
It's a good question. If you're talking SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, I honestly couldn't give you a number. We have a fairly deep pipeline of projects that are going to the cloud. We do run Workday, we do run Salesforce, pretty typical for a large organization on the SaaS side. We do have some IaaS deployments. A lot of our demand right now, and part of the reason, and I'll get to this a little later, but I'll say a bit on it now, part of the reason that we're looking and that I'm looking at what's the next generation of architecture, security architecture patterns and strategy is because we're seeing a lot more demand in the PaaS microservices serverless space, which I think is great from a security standpoint. The vulnerability footprint shrinks dramatically, at least for what we're responsible for. Of course, the cloud provider takes on a lot of that at the operating system level. But the automation that the likes of AWS and Azure and Google have to actually manage operating systems and hide all that from their clients is really quite impressive. I look at the Spectre meltdown issue and how quickly the cloud providers have patched that. And I think barely anyone noticed that they did it, which is a far cry, I think, from how a lot of enterprises do that sort of thing. So we're really trying to leverage what the cloud providers do really well and better. And then we focus on what Medtronic does better and what our core strategies are for business. So I can't really give you a number as far as what percentage has migrated. We've been doing it, I would say, for a solid 3 to 4 years prior to my coming on board at Medtronic. So we're probably in our third generation of how do we manage cloud and how do we best leverage it. So I hope that at least answers part of the question. Okay. So this is another bit different look, and this shows the development timeline or development process and how the different levels of architecture interact. So we, of course, have up here our business architects. It really depends on what, again, like I said earlier, both business and information architects. They're trying to understand what from a business standpoint we're trying to do. Then we have both our senior architects here and then our enterprise architects. And this is really taking an enterprise view of it. How will this fit into the overall enterprise? And how best and what, do we already have solutions for it that we can leverage already? Do we have to go out to the market to find new solutions? Are we duplicating efforts, et cetera? And finally, the technical architects here get involved from, okay, how do we design the network portion? How do we design the platform? How do we design the AWS, the VPC structures, the VNet structures, et cetera? And then also, of course, how do we do security? How do we encrypt data in the cloud effectively? How do we log and monitor and manage for malware, et cetera, and do our application security functions in the cloud and container security and so on. So all those things are handled more on the technical architecture side. But ultimately and I'll show you how that fits in the overall EA process here next. Okay. And this, I'll show you here a bit where cloud fits in. So left to right really begins with the demand pipeline. And that could be, strategic programs. It could be our PMO intake. It could be our intake on the security side. That all gets into a common funnel, and then we do a risk review of that. So we're saying, okay, what's the technology risk? So security does security risk, and we're careful not to overlap and contradict there. So really, EA is looking at technology risk. We partner with our global security office to really look at security risk, because that is their responsibility. And we review that, we assign it a rating, and this is where back to one of the learning objectives as far as how do we right-size governance? If something is low risk, or is this just the scope is expanding, we're not really changing the design. Those are fairly low risk efforts. Not that there's no risk, but they're fairly low risk. So we generally will approve those as defined without any additional deliverables. We're not going to do architecture diagrams. We're not going to do other than what already exists. So that way we can get a lot of these through the process and make room for more strategic, more high risk efforts. So that's really what that number 2 here is meant to do. And then once that's done, if we do determine that we need artifacts developed, or if it's new, that architecture is then created. And that's done in this architecture definition document. That's really what codifies that and what documents it. And that'll go through some cycles and revision. And that'll go through iteration, and we'll identify gaps. It'll go back for redesign. And ultimately what we want to get to is something that's implementable, that we've at least sussed out, some of the issues and gaps we see in it. And then it ultimately goes then to number 5 here, which is the design review. And this is where the architect that's been working, or architects that have been working on the project, then come to the design review. And that's for the senior architects look at it from an enterprise standpoint and say, yep, that fits. And these conversations have happened in the background already. This is more the formal review process. So by and large, anything that gets to this point has already been reviewed pretty thoroughly. Then we publish that decision. And then it's on to execution. And the larger programs, the more high-risk programs, we will do a follow-up review of the actual implementation to make sure that what was designed was actually implemented, because we can all know that can slip during implementation. And if it did slip, how much? And do we need to go back and adjust the design or adjust the execution of it? So that's the existing process. I would say cloud, we took a little, and this can be admittedly a bit high effort, especially for new projects or high risk projects. And for cloud, of course, we're trying to really enable quicker time to market, less overhead, so to speak, less governance, but the right amount of governance. And so what we did is we combined some of these steps into a separate federated model where we have a federated team in the Cloud Center of Excellence that does a lot of these steps within the cloud program, still with oversight from EA. So I sit on that team. There are people from our global security office that sit on that team, as well as cloud architects. So it doesn't go before the full review board all the time. So that's one of the things that we've done to optimize that. I'll just pull out a couple things here. So, using this model, and we're constantly tweaking this, about 70% of our efforts are we determine our low risk and have no deliverables. So they go through the process pretty quickly and on execution. And then you can see here where if it's a relatively small effort and within a pretty specific domain, it'll just be a senior enterprise or a senior architect review. So I might just review that with an enterprise architect, say, this looks good. There's no reason to go before the full board. It's not that complex. It doesn't touch other areas as much as it usually would. So we'll send that through. Then we have the federated efforts. And this is really where the cloud efforts fall in. So we have a number of federated architects in network and security and cloud. And those federated architects are really responsible for looking at those efforts, and they'll do a functional ARB review. And this is really what our Cloud Center of Excellence is. It performs that function in partnership with the overall EA governance model, but independently of it. We also have efforts that may be regional in nature, and we have regional ARB review boards, let's say in Greater China, in EMEA. And then anything that's really significant enterprise, a global concern or strategic or high risk efforts, that goes before gets full review. But again, all the outcomes are seen by the global team. So if we see, well, that should really get more scrutiny than it is, we can always adjust for that. That's by and large tolerance. Okay, so that's the overall. I think that gives you a good idea of the overall EA standpoint. So I'll pause there for a minute. Any questions on that before I move into the specific cloud security effort?
Yeah, Jeff Rasmussen, had a question.
Yes.
Do you are you doing waterfall design here, or are you taking the information as they're building the products? How much of the end result are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think I caught all that, so I'll repeat it. It's how much of this is waterfall versus maybe more of a DevOps agile approach. We're really trying to support both. The original EA governance process was really developed when there was more of a waterfall approach, and you can kind of see how that's reflected in the design of the process design. What we really did with cloud, we realized a few things. Of course, the cloud platforms change so often and so quickly that we have really no hope of keeping up to every feature addition and every new service that comes out from the cloud platform providers. We're just not going to be able to do it. So I think one of the things we did right early on was we sent the platform through the full process. So AWS, Azure, et cetera, we said, we're going to approve these as platforms at a senior IT leadership level. But when it comes to the individual projects, we're going to leave that up to the Cloud Center of Excellence and the individual technical leaders to really deal with that. We're going to cut that part of the governance out of it, which is the one that probably took a lot of the time, frankly, is to get to that standard process. So we standardized the platform, and by default, all the services. But the first time a service gets used, that will come through the CCOE and security teams and so on. And if we think it's going to be a commonly used service or design, we'll put that on the list to develop a pattern for it so that anyone else that comes through and uses that pattern, we can eliminate that part of the governance process. That's really what these patterns do. We look for repetitive implementations. We document it, build the pattern, and then anyone that uses that going forward, that no longer needs to go through governance. So then we're only doing governance on things that are new or high risk or use new technology. So I think we're doing a bit of both. I wouldn't say we're quite, some of our dev teams are really far down the path on the agile side. You can imagine an organization the size of Medtronic and global in nature. We have all of it from traditional waterfall to very agile, very DevOps-ish teams, dev teams. So we're supporting that whole range. Now we're trying some things on the more DevOps agile side where, like you've seen in other organizations probably, where you're embedding security people and architecture people in those teams. There's just not enough of those people to embed in every product team. There's just not enough of them. So we're still figuring out what the optimal model for that is. And frankly, using the patterns, I think we can free up people's time to look at the more strategic things. So you can give that to a dev team. Here's a set of patterns that we developed. Use these. If you can't, then let's talk. But as long as you're using these, you really don't need a whole lot of oversight. That's the ultimate goal, and that's been met with different levels of success, and I can touch on that a little later. But that's a great question. So the answer, I guess, that was a big it depends, or all of the above, one or two.
David, how has the enterprise of security architecture changed at Medtronic during COVID-19?
Okay, so I lost a little bit of Mercy. Could you repeat, please?
Sure. So how has the landscape, the EA landscape at Medtronic changed since COVID-19?
Okay, yeah, great question. So what EA has done, and not just EA, the security teams have done this, a lot of teams in IT have done this. We've created a fast path process. First of all, everything's gone virtual like everybody else. Happily, this was all done via WebEx and SharePoint and everything else, a lot of other online tools before. So it wasn't a big leap for us to do that. It's just that you do miss I think the collaboration part of being in the same room doing these reviews, but we're pretty successful doing those remotely too. What we have done is anything COVID-19 related gets a fast path into a separate team. I actually happen to be on that team that comprises a small handful of people in EA. Anything that comes through COVID-19 goes to the top of the list and that team takes it. So it doesn't interrupt what's happening in the larger EA community, but we do have a separate fast path for it. I know we've done the same in security and other places where there's a rapid response team and at the business level as well. And of course, Medtronic being the business that we're in, it's not just our internal projects. We also have products coming through that are serving hospitals and healthcare providers and so on that are related to COVID-19. Of course, those get immediate attention from everyone, so we can get those out and help our customers, help infected patients and so on. So that's a great question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when it comes to security, again, I don't think this will surprise anyone, but I'm going to call out a few things here. And first of all is how we define capabilities. And this was a big change. I think an approach that EA brought to the table is we really look at security and everything really, whether it's business side or IT or security, as a set of capabilities. Ignore the technology for now. We don't care if it's in AWS or Azure or Google or on-premise or anywhere else. There is a capability we need to satisfy, no matter what the platform is. And what we're doing, and I'll get into this a little later, we're defining those sets of capabilities. And then what we do is we map the technologies that are available in each of those platforms to those capabilities. So it's my opinion, it's great to know what we can do. It's also equally important to know what we can't do. So when we have gaps in security, and when I speak to solution providers and they come and say, we can do this, this, and this, okay, great. Then within this context, what can't you do? Because that's still a concern for me. I'm not expecting anyone to do everything, but from my perspective, I have to account for those gaps. And maybe we leave it a gap, but we have to do that in a fully informed fashion. So really define those capabilities up front. And this is a bit of a change. We like to talk about technology and tools and everything else, especially in security. It's just kind of a habit, I think, in the industry. I think this really made us take a step back and say, okay, this is what we're really trying to accomplish. Now let's talk about how we're going to do it. And then secondly, industry standards. Medtronic, like anyone, there's no shortage of those. And a couple of big ones, of course, HIPAA, high trust, et cetera, are important to us. We also use NIST CSF quite heavily and the CIS benchmarks quite heavily, and those factor into how we define our capabilities as well. And we really want to minimize the use of proprietary security frameworks. And this is my personal, even when I was at Thomson Reuters, we had clients come to us when same thing happens here in Medtronic too. We have clients come to us. I don't run that program in Medtronic. I did at Thomson Reuters, so they always came to us with these proprietary frameworks. It wasn't any different than ISO, or it wasn't any different than NIST, but for whatever reason, it felt the need to rearrange the order of the controls, which meant that we had to spend time reordering them to what we had already, complied with. So we're really trying to be very standards as much as we possibly can. Now, being compliant with standards, as we all know, is not the same as being secure, but it is, my opinion, the baseline, and we can add things on top of that. So we're really trying to standardize as much as possible and saving the special things for things that are truly special. And then we identify gaps and redundancies and optimize for cost and performance. And then really using cloud as an enabler. And I mentioned earlier, leveraging PaaS and SaaS to reduce our attack surface that we have to manage. Really leveraging the cloud providers for what they're good at managing, and then using our resources to manage what we're good at managing. So that's, I have a lot of, I think, really encouraged by what this could mean to us from an overall security management standpoint and architecture standpoint. And frameworks and patterns, we'll develop those patterns. I'll speak more about this in a bit. But really to make it built in. They're standardized, they exist. We have, our implementation teams know how to implement them. And that's frankly still a gap for us, is that turning those designs into operational, rubber hits the road kind of thing. That was, I think, more difficult than I had imagined, frankly, because it's, I think Eric mentioned this earlier, right? It's new skills, new approach, new thought process for everybody. And going from design architecture to here's a running system that we can provide assurance on and know we're doing it right, that's a whole different story. So that's going to be a focus of this new version too, is how we can make that better. Of course, supporting innovation, faster time to market, and then really align these things across the different efforts. And I'll talk a little more about this too, is really, this isn't just a cloud concern. We're really talking about cloud, we're talking about on-premise, we're talking about third parties, we're talking about all of it. So it's really trying to align those things. Okay, so version 1, and apologize for some of the blacked out areas here. This was developed in conjunction with a partner of ours, so that is some of their intellectual property. So I'm blocking this out out of respect for that. It is something I'm happy to talk about one-on-one. So if you want to understand more about what we did, I'm happy to share that in a more private setting and kind of more on what we did, but really trying to respect their intellectual property too. So what we did is, when we started the effort, we looked internally. We looked at the business context. What's our business? What does our business want to do? What are the use cases? What are our security policy standards, et cetera? What are we doing? What are our infrastructure strategies that are on the horizon? Well, public cloud, private cloud, legacy, et cetera. And then we looked outside, and this is where our partner brought a lot of expertise in, was what are they seeing in the industry? What are the best practices? What's successful for others, and how can we leverage that? We looked, of course, across the regulatory spectrum. Again, HIPAA, GDPR, data localization has probably been one of the more interesting things for us to deal with. That's rapidly evolving, of course, and seems every month there's more countries that have passed laws that require data to stay in country. So that has been a particular focus of ours. And then also frameworks, of course, plenty of those, CSA being one of them that we incorporated into the design, NIST, CSF, TOGAF, et cetera. And that then resulted in what we called our cloud security reference architecture. And this is agnostic of a platform. We're not talking, this is not specific to AWS or Azure or Google or private cloud. This is really what are, again, our capabilities that we're looking for. and then we drill down into that. So we have, these are the key capabilities, and there's more underneath this, but these are the really high level ones. You can see things here. None of this would surprise anyone in the security field. You have security operations, governance, GRC, access management, etc. And then we define different levels of capabilities here. And then well, here, I'll get to that slide. Oh, this is the next slide. So this is kind of a precursor to the pattern. So before I touch on the pattern, so we take all that, we take those reference architectures, and this metaphor has stood up fairly well. Those are really the building codes. So when you pull a permit to build a house, there are certain legal codes you need to comply with. That doesn't mean every house looks the same. You can build a 12-bedroom house or a 2-bedroom house, and they both have to comply with the same building codes, but they look and function wildly differently. And that's what we're looking for, is let's make sure that the things that we need to have the same, or we need to have assurance on, we have building codes to support that, but give the product teams as much leeway as we can to build whatever kind of house they want to build. And I think the metaphors work pretty well. So the design patterns here are really the what on the different codes. The blueprints is how do we assemble those codes? How do we use those codes to assemble the house or to assemble the product? And then finally, what are those reference architectures or implementations that are used to actually build it? So that's, in a more than commonly understood way, this is what we're doing. And one thing, I mentioned this earlier, there's a pre-approval thing here, and this is the carrot, right? So once security and enterprise architecture have reviewed this and approved it, the design is finalized, anyone who uses that appropriately, it's pre-approved and no longer needs to go through governance. So it's a way to take some of the governance burden off of our product teams. And I'm going to underline appropriate here, because this can come back. So we may approve the patterns for, let's say it's for non-PHI data in the Americas. If that needs to be used for PHI data in EMEA, that needs to come back. Okay, that was not the use it was originally approved for. There's other requirements that we have to take into account, and we'll come back and we'll tweak that. Sometimes they get approved at the global level, use for anywhere globally. Sometimes they are regionally restricted, or they're restricted to certain data classifications. All that can change, of course, but they do have those restrictions sometimes. Okay. So now back to that reference architecture again. So here we're going to focus, and this is focused on IaaS. So the patterns, these little yellow circles here are the actual patterns. So here we have the capabilities, and then the circles are the patterns. Sometimes they're one-to-one. Sometimes there's one pattern, but there's multiple capabilities. That's in the case of access management. And though that's just because they're so closely related, it didn't make sense to do individual patterns for these. And it made more sense strategically to look at this as one cohesive unit. And those patterns are aligned here. So we build those patterns, and we look at it. And again, here's another list of the patterns. You'll see these again, GRC1, GRC2, that's what you saw on the previous slide. And we have the reference architecture in this column. So we've defined that for everything, all those, and there's 20 patterns you can see here. We've defined those reference architectures, and then we define what we call the reference implementation. So how are those patterns implemented in each of the platforms? So whether it's AWS, Azure, private cloud, etc. What do those look like when you actually go to implement them? And that's what these columns are. And some of these we kept out of scope for various reasons, but that's how we leverage those reference architectures. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Sometimes it can lose folks here, but that's really what we do. We go from reference architecture to reference implementation for every specific cloud platform. Okay. Pretty good on time, so I should have time for questions here at the end too. So that's version 1. And we've been working with that for a couple of years now. We've learned a lot, frankly, what we did right, what we didn't do right. Learned a lot from that whole process. Now we're looking at, okay, version 2, what's next? And again, as I said earlier, there's a lot more demand now for serverless, PaaS services, microservices, et cetera, containerization. That didn't exist when we did this first version. At least it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough demand for it to justify this kind of effort on architecture. There certainly is now. So now it's going back to that. First of all, how do we tweak the IaaS patterns to be more, I think, user-friendly, implementation-friendly, and then how do we incorporate these new technologies that we're starting to get a lot of demand for? And so, driving this, again, more demand for these services. The cloud service providers, the security capabilities have improved dramatically in the last 3 years. I think we can all attest. There's new services being released every day, it seems. Or improvements to those services, and we want to leverage those. And patterns. It's great to actually go out to the cloud platform websites and see how many of those design patterns, how many architecture patterns are being published now by the cloud providers themselves. I love that. If those work for us, great. It provides all sorts of advantages to us from a cost and standpoint and reusability and so on. So we'll leverage those to the extent we can. The third-party cloud security provider marketplace has certainly expanded significantly, and those solutions keep getting better every day. We'll continue to improve our alignment to industry standard frameworks. That's always a goal of ours. And again, I think, Eric, you touched on this earlier. Really, this isn't just a cloud thing. We're talking on-premise, we're talking cloud. We really have to have the full picture here, and that's really what architecture is for, right? It's what's the big picture? How do these things relate to each other across into the different environments? And then, of course, and everyone has this, right? All our on-premise security strategies, those are not static either. Those continue to evolve on network, endpoint security, and so on. So we have to make sure that we stay complementary to those. And then, of course, the big one here is being able to leverage the scalability and lower cost. Some of the things I see that we're capable of doing in the cloud space, you can't even do on-premise. It just would take too much time and effort, and money, and investment to do it. But in the cloud, it's some of these things are much easier to do. So that means we have to change our approach from a tooling and process standpoint. But there's certainly some advantages I'm seeing there. I just pulled these out. These are somewhat dated now. Last year, year and a half ago, but you'll see here, and I pulled one from Azure and AWS. Do FedRAMP High. See if I can find it over here. And AWS also has FedRAMP High capability in some of the regions. Knowing how difficult this is to achieve, this is fairly impressive in my opinion. That you can go out and buy this kind of infrastructure today and leverage it and not have to build that yourself. It's something that we would be foolish not to take advantage of. Of course, we have a responsibility to make sure it's operated that way, designed and operated that way, but to have that capability available to us, I think is something we would look really hard at. So this is what we're kind of keeping our eyes on is how can we leverage what's being done at scale elsewhere. So then that brings us up, this is the last slide I have. So version 2, this is where we're starting. So I mentioned earlier, standards-based approach first off. So we are leveraging NIST. If you look across the top, NIST CSF, we're leveraging that heavily. And then also CIS on the left side here. So CIS, I think, does a nice job of looking at the technology and the hardening controls and that sort of thing. NIST CSF, I look at more, some more of a capability model framework and process framework. I think blending those two together, I think gives us a really good base to start from. And then we map our tooling to that matrix. So what tools in AWS satisfy which capabilities, and this will define our capability framework. Then we apply the technologies in the different cloud platforms into this capability model. And of course, that applies then you go to the right here, and whether it's SaaS or PaaS or IaaS, private cloud or public cloud, we have the same capability model. Now, I'll be the first to say, well, we're not, the vision is really to apply this capability model to all those. The reality of it is, and being pragmatic, this is going to come in phases. It will apply in certain areas before others. So, but at least we have, the end goal in mind, and we don't end up going down divergent paths with the different platforms. So again, it's important to me that we align, cloud and on-premise together. So this is where we're starting. We're relatively early in the process of doing this. We're defining our capability model. We're starting to look at solutions that can fill in those, what we currently have for solutions versus what we can use to fill in. So that's where we're at. So with that, thank you again. I think we have time for questions. I'll be happy to take some more questions.
I'm going to question that came through is I noticed you had multiple cloud environments. You have AWS, you have Microsoft Azure, and you also have your private cloud environment. Has Medtronic standardized on any one of those just as a move forward strategy?
No, so we are a hybrid multi-cloud environment and plan to be. There's just some things, my personal opinion on that is there are certain things that AWS is good for. I'll use AWS and Azure and Google, all three of them, big ones. And there's others, of course, I'm not leaving them out by any means, but there are certain things that certain cloud platforms are better at than others. Not that they're all very capable platforms, but there are certain, based on what we're looking for in a product, the products we're building or what we need to integrate it with in our on-premise environment, there are certain cloud platforms that make more sense than others. And we want to keep those options open, which adds complexity, of course, but it also gives us some flexibility down the road. So.
And how are you managing that risk within those platforms and the workloads that exist there?
If you're talking about security risk, I guess there's a few ways we can define that risk.
Security risk, yes.
Yeah, okay. That really comes back to this. As we define these capabilities, so if we're looking at, let's say we're ingesting all these logs from the different cloud platforms, and there's certain indicators of compromise, there's certain things we're looking for. We want to make sure we're looking at those across the board so that we can provide assurance that the things we're looking for from a security standpoint in one cloud platform are the same things we're looking for in the other cloud platform. Of course, the tooling is different, gives us different views of that, but we can still map that back to a capability saying, okay, we've accounted for that one or we haven't accounted for it. Or maybe there's some we've accounted for in one cloud platform and some we haven't in another, and vice versa. I mean, at least we're doing it in an informed manner. It's not, we don't want it to be a surprise. Let's put it that way. We know where the gaps are. We know what the risk is in having those gaps, and or those capabilities we're not meeting. We'll call them gaps. They're just capabilities we're not meeting yet. And we know what the risk is, and we can work towards closing those. So I think there's certainly all sorts of tooling, and we've talked to a number of providers on tooling that provides that assurance, whether it's assurance of configurations in the IaaS space or PaaS space, or log analysis, or operating system assurances that we're doing things correctly. There's all sorts of things that we could bring to bear there. I think we're, at least for this, I'll probably talk more about the look forward plan here rather than what we've come from. I think looking forward, we really want to be as cloud native and automated as possible. That's really one of my goals here, is that when we go to deploy a new product, that the security deployment can happen as quickly as the infrastructure deployment and in concert with it. And also have that be right sized so that you don't, so often, I think everyone here will be familiar with this, when you deploy on premise, there's a pretty significant capital investment in doing that. And there's oftentimes an innovator tax where the first business unit to do it has to foot the bill. And there's ways to offset that, of course, but that can be a pretty significant barrier. So the nice thing about cloud, and especially cloud native services, are often billed at the same scale as the infrastructure. So it really helps minimize that initial upfront cost and more fairly allocates the cost to the businesses that are using it. I kind of got on a tangent there, but I hope that answered the question.
It did. Thank you. If anyone else would like to post questions or in the chat or email me, please feel free to do so. Okay, so what are lessons learned? And is there anything that you would do differently? Is a question, David.
Yeah. Okay. Lessons learned. I think when we embarked on this 3 years ago now, the demand pipeline was, again, IaaS focused, but we still, I think we tried to do a little too much theoretical design, not enough practical design. I think building the security infrastructure, I think as security professionals, we know when we start talking about theoreticals, that rabbit hole gets really deep really fast. So it's what's possible versus what's probable. We talk about a lot about what's possible. And yes, there's a lot of things that are possible, but highly unlikely. And do we design for those things or not? And I think we may have designed for too many of those initially, and the patterns somewhat reflected that. So I think one lesson learned is really trying to bring in more. Some of that was because the pipeline wasn't very deep at the time. It's a lot deeper now. So can we look at what's in that pipeline and what we've designed for already, and really go back and look, okay, what do we really need from an architecture standpoint? What really mattered and what didn't matter? And we'll find, I think, both of those things and take out everything that didn't matter and try to streamline that. So I think that was one lesson learned. I think the other lesson was, on the plus side, I think, was the way that we approved the platforms. I think really helped our turnaround in really right-sizing the governance so that every time a new service was released by a cloud platform, we didn't have to restart the approval process on those. We left it up to really the technical experts to determine how best to really implement that. That helped us quite a bit, and I think we will continue to do that. I think another lesson learned is don't underestimate the operational complexity. Again, earlier comments, I think Eric mentioned it. This new skills, new approach, new a lot of new stuff, and getting the operational chops of the organization, and really training and getting people to understand what that new world looks like. It's a big hurdle. Certainly I had that hurdle too. It's like there's a lot of things that you have to kind of set aside and say, that's, set the biases aside. After 20, almost 30 years of doing this, it's like there's a lot of stuff that, a lot of biases you accumulate that you don't necessarily recognize right away, but you start to see it's like, I can't think about it that way anymore. I have to think about it differently. So that was one of the things that we learned too, I think, and not only for EA, but for everyone involved. Thank you for that one.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question?
Okay.
It looks like we are good. Thank
Okay.
you, David.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And again, my contact information is right there. I would love to connect with anyone that would like to have a further discussion.
Oh, wait. We have another question.
Okay.
First of all, someone said super presentation, thank you. And then EA aims at a big target. What is the hit ratio?
Can you repeat that? Didn't quite understand that one.
Sure. Enterprise architecture aims at a big target. What is the hit ratio?
Oh, gotcha. As far as how many So hit ratio as in how many projects do we actually come through the pipeline as they should? I think that's probably one hit ratio.
As in how much IT falls within the scope of EA.
Oh, okay. So from a charter standpoint, all of IT, all of enterprise IT does, but not on the R&D side. So there's a different process for handling R&D and product development. And when it gets down to the R&D side of it, if it's touching enterprise systems that are in the data center or in our cloud environments, then EA has, that is within EA scope. If it's something that is deployed to a hospital, there's a whole different process around how we do R&D and deploy the client sites and all that. While we do get involved in that, it's different. We don't necessarily have a final say on that. We do contribute to on a lot of those. Good question.
Thanks, Brian. Anyone else? I'm looking at the chat if you have additional questions. All right, David, thank you very much. And I wanted to interject this. I forgot to introduce David properly when we started this conversation.
Don't need to do that now.
We do this. We should do this. You've given us your time today, so I'm going to read David's bio, and it's good for our peers and our members to know, just in case you want to reach out and ask additional questions. So David has 25 years of experience in technology and security fields. Is currently a strategic advisor of enterprise security and cloud architecture at Medtronic. He provides leadership for security and cloud architecture and related risk mitigation strategies in close partnership with global security, privacy, IT, and business stakeholders. And prior to Medtronic, David was director of cybersecurity services for KPMG, where he assisted clients with risk management and security program strategies. Before KPMG, he was president of Intensity Analytics, a security software firm that specializes in using real-time human behavioral pattern analysis as a means to provide transparent, strong authentication, threat intelligence, and anomalous activity detection. David also held a number of positions at Thomson Reuters, including 10 years as both a division and global CISO, where his team led the corporate programs for information security, business continuity, disaster recovery, and technology-related audit and compliance activities. Among all these accolades, he also is a master's degree in computer information science from the University of Minnesota Institute of Technology. So again, David, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. And again, feel free to reach out. Email or text is fine. So appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Jason, Carrie, with that, our sponsors, thank you again for your participation. Anyone else have additional comments before we end the meeting today? I would take that as a no. Again, thank you, everyone. Please be safe. Enjoy the upcoming weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again in June. Thank you.